I vote that we rate them based on the number of required Dragonators.
What? Dragonators?
Where's my Dragonator?
But we could just,
What about the Dragonator?
Okay, everyone calm down!
Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, welcome one and all to a list that deserves updating. Every Monster Hunter game is a journey of its own, and they all end in the same way. Some sort of amazingly unique creature that is an absolute joy to hunt. Earlier entries in the series were a bit more tame, but over time they really found themselves and stuck with the idea that the last thing that you fight in a Monster Hunter game should be an absolute spectacle to behold. Of course, for the most part, that really only applies to the online final bosses, but we'll be talking about all the offline ones too, just for the sake of completion. But yes, today is all about ranking the final bosses of each Monster Hunter game in tier list fashion. We'll go in order of release, and while I will be considering the context of their existence in their own games, I will be treating their most recent entries as the way that their fight is intended to be. Without further ado then, let's begin with Monoblos in the B tier. This monster is pretty neat conceptually, and at the time it was awesome. A burrowing horned dragon that would run around trying to impale you, but well, the main downfall of this monster is even in Monster Hunter 1, the original game, you had already fought Diablos before fighting Monoblos, and these monsters are just so incredibly similar it becomes hard to properly separate them. That said, I think I do prefer Monoblos to Diablos, and so I consider it fair that he was put later in the game. I just wish that he had the first game alone before Diablos showed up as well. Second then, we have Fatalis in the S+ tier, the final boss of both Monster Hunter and Monster Hunter G. Even back then, he was an incredibly imposing creature, much more terrifying than any of the other monsters that we had seen. However, at the time, his fight was pretty simple and didn't really match his lore or visuals all that great. It was just really powerful but simple physical attacks and varying kinds of fireballs. However, now that we have his Iceborne fight to judge him on, yeah, he's one of the best creations in all of Monster Hunter if we're speaking objectively. His fight is incredible now, and it totally lives up to the hype of his lore and his visuals. Easy S+ as far as I'm concerned. Then we have Lao Shen Lung, the only monster that I put on the D tier in this list. Yeah, I know, some people like Lao, and I do think that visually he's sorta cool, but I just can't stop feeling like he looks like a really old Rathalos without wings. On top of that, his fight is essentially just him walking forwards while you beat him up for no reason in particular, other than that he would ruin a part of a fort. He isn't even particularly fighting back, he just wants to go for a walk, he wants to get away. Maybe one day they'll bring this monster back and change his fight in a way that makes me appreciate him more, but as it stands now, he is just sort of boring to me.
That's so mean.
After that, we come to Lunastra, who I've placed in the B tier. This is a tough one. Visually, I mean, she's just blue Teostra with a different horn shape and no beard, and back in the day, her fight was literally just blue Teostra. And even though I am considering the modernized fights of these monsters, it is hard to just forget the fact that in the game that she was a final fight, she was essentially a copy-paste of another monster, which just sucks. The main reason she is even up in this tier is because of how much I appreciate her Iceborne version of the fight, full of crescent shapes to represent her moon mythology and fun mechanics. Some people hate it, but I enjoy it quite a bit. Next up, Crimson Fatalis, who I'm also putting in the B tier. This, I think, really shows the difference an updated fight can make in this series. His lore is basically just Fatalis, but in a different environment and much angrier, and his fight is just the old Fatalis fight, but with more fire, blast powder, and the completely inexplicable ability to summon meteors. Yes, this fight is better than base Fatalis was in the old games, but not by a massive amount, at least not in my opinion, and that's what this list is about, my opinions. Then we have Tigrex in the B tier as well, the village final boss of Freedom 2, while also being the flagship of that game. I do like Tigrex quite a bit as a monster in general, but I consider him extremely lacking as far as a final boss goes. He isn't particularly mysterious, he isn't particularly spectacular in his moveset or visuals. The main thing that makes sense here is that, at least in his initial game, he was punishing as all hell. So from a difficulty standpoint, I can understand calling him a final boss, but not from much else, especially when you compare him to the online final boss of the same game. Akantor, who is in tier A. In a weird way, I sort of view Akantor as like the ultimate Tigrex. He has a lot of chargy shenanigans, he is massive and just always angry, he roams the lands looking for fights purposefully just to sate his own bloodlust, and his roars deal damage, but in a wholly different way, instead producing a full-on sonic beam of death that he can project at reasonably long range. He is terrifying, he looks terrifying, and fighting him feels terrifying. I love it, and he is a pretty fitting final boss. The only thing keeping him in the A tier is that there have been some absolutely killer final bosses that I just don't think he quite compares to. After that, we come to Ukanlos, who I've put in the S tier. This is extremely personal for me as well. I'm sure some people prefer Akantor to Ukanlos, but this is the way that I have them because Ukanlos is just such an amazing creature to me. Unlike Akantor, he just wants to hang out in his own tiny area and be left alone, and I prefer this sort of peaceful monsters. He has this absolutely massive, beautiful shovel chin.
My chin.
He dives around with his angled backplate sticking out like an absolutely massive shark, and he even uses his chin to lob snowballs at you. I just think he is weirdly cute, but also intimidating at the same time, and I love the way that his moveset works. Next then is Sedeus, who also is in the S tier. Visually and lore-wise, this creature is absolutely incredible. A massive whale is the perfect monster for a game with underwater combat as a feature, and the fact that he is only even a threat because his horns are slowly growing over his eyes and causing him tons of pain, so he's bashing his head against the walls underwater and causing what feel like earthquakes on land due to his sheer size. I love everything about this concept. His fight is of course a bit lacking, and that's the only thing keeping him from the absolute top tier, because again, I adore every other part of him. After that, another entry into the S tier, Alatreon. The second black dragon on this list, this monster just exudes coolness. Being the only monster capable of using all 5 elements in one way or another, there really is no possible comparison to him in the series. It sort of makes him uniquely strong against other monsters in combat as well, in theory, as every monster has an elemental weakness, and he can use that to his advantage, whatever it is. He also just looks absolutely hellish, which is great, like a demon risen from the ground, and while his original fight was pretty good, his revamped fight in Iceborne was amazing in my opinion. Then we have Zinogre, who will be going on the B tier. I do like him as a monster, though less than many people do. I significantly respect that he was the first fanged wyvern and the only one in fact until the 5th generation games came out, but while his ecology is great, with the synergy between him and the Fulgur bugs and his moveset is fun, I do think that, like Tigrex earlier, he's just a bit underwhelming for a final boss slot compared to a lot of the others that we have here. Not necessarily a B tier monster, but a B tier final boss specifically. Amatsu, however, is the S+ tier, an incredible example of how to knock it out of the park. Visually, this creature is incredible. They took advantage of all the underwater monster movement animations in this game and instead applied it to a flying monster so it swims through the air, essentially, backing it up with the ecology of being a storm dragon that controls wind currents in order to make itself fly, which is just badass all by itself. The fight on top of that is incredible all around. Tornadoes everywhere, storms, water beams. This is what I mean when I say spectacle fight, and this was one of the earliest spectacle fights to also have extremely enjoyable combat on top of that. This monster easily deserves its place here. Ivory Legiacris then also lands on the B tier, and honestly for very similar reasons as Zinogre did. He has more electricity at his disposal than regular Legiacris, but this mostly just comes in the form of AoE attacks, which I'm not a fan of in general. He spends pretty much all of his time on land as opposed to his underwater, which is kind of underwhelming in my opinion, considering he is the offline final boss of the Monster Hunter generation that had underwater combat, and I just don't like him even as much as I like regular Laggy, so there's that.
Sorry.
Next up is Dire Moralis, the walking volcano, who is the second monster on our A tier today. This is a monster that I absolutely adore the visuals of, and I think the ecology behind him is incredible, literally just being hot enough, generating enough energy by passively existing that he can decimate the population of an entire sea. His fight, however, is, well, it just doesn't do much. He is aggressive, he will attack you both physically with balls of magma fired out of him, but this is one that is all spectacle with little actual Monster Hunter combat substance in the fight, so to say, and so his placement is solely based on the non-combat parts of his existence. After that is Shagaru Magala in the S tier. He was a major part of the story in Monster Hunter 4, being evolved from the form of Magala, and even his old fight was pretty damn cool, but his new fight in Rise adds a whole full-on frenzy beam from the mouth, and honestly just being able to properly fight this new version moved him up quite a bit in my books, making him a clear S tier final boss for me. Then we have Dalamadur in the S+ tier. This is based almost entirely around the spectacle of it all. The lore of him literally being able to tunnel through mountains with ease is awesome. He is the biggest monster in mainline Monster Hunter, which is cool too, and snakes are awesome. Giant snakes are more awesome. The literal representation of a world-eating serpent is just goddamn sick, and he looks amazing in general. Sadly, the original fight was relatively stagnant, just going around to different platforms, slowly beating up individual segments of his body, but even without that, I love this monster too much to put him anywhere lower than the top top tier. That said, if they ever remake this monster, if they ever make him a properly enjoyable fight as well, then he'll probably be one of my personal favorite monsters just of all time. For now though, he is just one of the biggest spectacles in the entire series. After that is Seregios, technically speaking, specifically Apex Seregios, who I've placed in the B tier. Maybe this is because I haven't fought Apex Seregios specifically, so a lot of this is just me thinking about the regular version of the monster, but while I think he is an incredible monster, I think once again he's just a bit lacking as a final boss for an entire section of a Monster Hunter game. This is a great fight, a beautiful creature, cool lore, but just not all that awe-striking of an encounter, especially as you've already fought regular Seregios earlier in the game. Next up, Rusted Kushala Daora, also in the B tier. He's basically just regular Kushala Daora with less aerial and wind shenanigans, being a much more physical beast. If they remake this fight in the future, my opinion might change on it if they do it well, but as it stands, I just find this monster sort of boring. Its ecology is interesting, but it's just a Kushala Daora shedding its skin, and this fight sort of feels like that too. Regular Kushala Daora's big deal is the whole wind thing, so taking that away just makes him less unique. Then comes Gogmazios in the S+ tier, one of the only monsters in the series I have not yet fought myself, but his legend absolutely precedes him. His design is impeccable, terrifying, and interesting, Dragonator sticking out and everything. His fight is an absolute spectacle to watch, and it is more interesting than most massive monster encounters tend to be. This is another example of an incredible final boss entry, one that ties the whole experience together in a nice little bow. Glavnus then, who I put in the A tier this time around, is quite a fun monster. He looks a bit more demonic than monsterish, but I can't really hold that against him in a final boss tier list as a lot of these creatures are crazy looking. He's essentially just a Carnotaur with a giant sword for a tail, and that is really awesome. His moveset is fun, especially in his newer incarnation in Iceborne, and I do think he makes a bit more of an imposing of a final threat for a game than any of the things I put in the lower tiers, even though he isn't a particularly high threat level of a monster, technically speaking. After that, we have Nakarkos in the A tier. This is a great monster, starting off just looking like a multi-headed Hydra type of monster until the second time you fight him, which reveals he is actually just a giant cuttlefish that uses the skulls of various monsters to apply different effects to you. The fight has a unique status, and it takes place in an arena of bones that he has collected, and this monster can also fire a crazy giant red beam. Again, the only thing keeping it from placing higher is I think other monsters just did the job a little bit better. Not a fault of him, after all, the A tier is a place of honor. The other tiers above are just even better. Next up is Ahtal, who I've put in the S+ tier. What an absolutely unique creature. Not even technically an Elder Dragon, it has golden silk that it uses to swing around water wheels, girders, and Dragonators like it's nothing. Its shape is super unique among monsters, and it can even pilot a goddamn mech it creates from the broken down parts of fortresses. This is an absolute spectacle. It has multiple very different phases, and it is an enjoyable fight too. The perfect combo for a final boss. Then comes Valstrax, again another S+ tier. This monster looks like he's made of pure metal, and essentially he's a jet engine in his chest. He flies faster than any monster in the series, his wings can turn sort of inside out for use as stabbing weapons, and his signature attack is to fly up into the air extremely fast and then come crashing down into your face. As far as regular sized monsters go, this is perfect for a final boss. Then we enter the 5th generation with Xeno'jiiva, who I've put in the A tier. This monster is cool, the lore and cutscenes and visuals of it are all impeccable, the fight is alright, but this is one where you can feel the downsides of a massive monster just a little bit. That said, again, the A tier isn't a bad place to be. I still think quite highly of this creature as a final boss. After that, we have Shara Ishvalda in the S+ tier. Wow, what a monster. When you first see it, it is some sort of crazy massive rock golem, which just seems impossible as a Monster Hunter creature. Then you break off its shell and this ridiculous tree demon comes out firing blasts of sonic energy from its little winged tentacles, doing a Death Star beam and even a full-on frickin' spirit bomb. Not to mention it can dig through the ground by literally just vibrating at the right frequency to turn it to sand momentarily. How frickin' awesome is this? This is a spectacle monster that doesn't feel hurt by its size by any means, and I love it. With that, we move up to Rise, whose first final boss is Magna Malo for the village story, and I put him in the A tier. Magna is a very cool monster, his fight is great, and he is mysterious, but I just think his design, visually speaking, is a small touch off. I prefer him significantly before he gets his enraged back spikes, which is a tiny nitpick, but hey, when the monsters are all this good, we have to draw the line somewhere. Also, he basically attacks you with farts. Next up is Allmother Narwa in the S tier. This is an incredible spectacle of a fight all the way from beginning to end, but it does suffer just a little bit from the size of the monster, at least to me. It makes the fight cooler, but also less immersive as a Monster Hunter fight in a way that some other massive monsters have managed to get past. And for me, that's the only reason it's not in the absolute top tier. That said, finally we have Gaismagorm, who is in the S+ tier as far as I'm concerned. Visually, this creature is unlike any other we've ever seen, which just gets more and more impressive every generation as we have hundreds of monsters now. It is presented as a massive threat in a believable way. It has full control over the curios, and it essentially fights with a whole new version of Blast, even though no new status or blight is associated with it actively. Its fight is unique and inventive. It takes advantage of the space of the arena that it's in, and even the mounted ballista segments are enjoyable too. With all that said then, this is my complete tier list of Monster Hunter final bosses as of this point in 2022. One of my favorite things in these games is experiencing the crazy spectacles at the end, especially as these are usually some of the only creatures that we don't get spoiled on by early release trailers, meaning that the whole community gets to experience this surprise together, and I love that feeling. What do you think then? Which of these monsters should be swapped around a little bit for you, or do you agree with my ranking in general? Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.